Hi everyone, welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. This is your hub for engaging in deep conversations around serotonergic hallucinogens that alter perceptions, affect cognitive processes, induce mystical and spiritual experiences. Enjoy the show. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Psychedelic Conversations podcast. I have a very special guest with me. His name is Joël Brierre, and he is the founder of Cavalia Collective, offering deeply transformative retreats involving psychedelic work supported by biotech and both Eastern and Western integrative practices, and he specializes in 5-MeO. So we're going to dive into that. Welcome, Joël. So great to have you.
Hello, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Lovely to be here.
Awesome. So I always start with the story. So this is becoming like the theme of our podcast now, because I'm really interested in how did you come cross paths with psychedelics and especially 5-MeO. And yeah, if we can just begin with your story and then we can start talking about your offerings as well.
Absolutely. So I first came into contact with psychedelics in the mid '90s when I was a teenager, and immediately fell in love with them. I could tell there was something that separated them from the rest of the substances in which I was experimenting with so rigorously. And I grew up in a fairly spiritual family, and my parents gave me a lot of the classical books. Timothy Leary's books, Aldous Huxley's books, Carlos Castaneda books. And so I was gobbling that up when I was young, and had some really big experiences with psychedelics. But towards the end of the '90s or early 2000s, I kind of got clean off of all substances, including psychedelics. And then they were reintroduced to me probably around 2007, 2008, when I was living in the Virgin Islands by my two yoga teachers. And at that time, I had, found myself in the midst of a deeply devoted and serious yoga practice, and getting up every day at 3:30 in the morning and practicing for 2.5 hours. And this time, reapproaching plant medicines with a system of self-inquiry was a completely different game. And it just kept on going from there. And here I am.
Wow, you seem so young still. You must have delved into what was do you think having parents that are so open-minded and into alternative medicines really helps children? Because coming from, I can see like you must be in your 20s, and I mean,
oh, thank you. No, I'm 38.
Wow, so it must be the medicine, because a lot of the people who also work in medicine, they say my secret is the medicine. So, but I'm saying that I think it really is a gift for children when their parents are open-minded and they're not afraid to introduce that. So maybe you can talk to us about that a little bit. How was that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was really nice because they, I had that other influence, from my parents, and understanding about medicines from a ceremonial point of view, and from a, at that time in the '90s, everything was mostly recreational, and so having that understanding that they have been used for deep work in various cultures throughout history, and hearing about that from my parents definitely helped destigmatize it in my mind. There wasn't, those risks of, if I do this, am I, stumbling too deep into drug use or anything like that. And then even in my recovery, because as I mentioned, I was quite fond of all the other substances in the '90s too. And in my recovery, while a lot of people went straight no substance, there was not that kind of, NA and AA can kind of impress on people that, if you're an ex-addict, then if you have an LSD trip or something, 2 weeks later, you'll end up in an alley smoking crack or something like that. So, it kind of helped keep those types of stigmas from pervading my consciousness, we'll say.
Amazing. And what are your thoughts on the stigma that we're dealing right now as the psychedelic renaissance is approaching, or at least some people believe that we're actually going through it now? So do you see a lot of stigma still? Like how do you tackle with this in your work?
I see so little of it now compared to where it was years ago. I mean, now, especially after Michael Pollan's book came out years ago, it's been a complete game changer for kind of middle America, and the type of people who normally wouldn't engage with this type of work. But before, it was more, even 5-6 years ago, it was an effort of me trying to convince people that this wasn't crazy stuff, and that this stuff can really, really help. Now, luckily, there's so much more science out there. There's so much more kind of legitimate business around it and things like that. And so people are kind of getting less weirded out by it. And I'm sure there's still plenty of stigma. I think I'm lucky enough to kind of be encircled in an area where I feel everyone I come into contact with has some sort of experience with plant medicines and psychedelics. But I mean, yeah, it's gone full swing in the past couple of years, to where a lot of the old stigmas, before years ago, got looked at like a silly young hippie just messing around with weird drugs and stuff and trying to get trippy, but these are legitimate tools, and these are legitimate avenues of self-inquiry, and far more effective than we might than other ones, I've come to find. So I think now people are seeing the science, they're seeing the effects, they're hearing the stories. So yeah, I believe we're in full swing in this psychedelic renaissance, hopefully in the early swing, but yeah.
Yeah, amazing stuff. I mean, I speak to one of my good friends, he's in the psychedelic space also. And when I ask him this question, how to deal with the stigma, how to deal with all this, negativity around psychedelic medicines. And he says, what stigma? What negativity? I don't meet those people. Because he always says, the circle that I'm in, I never meet those people. Mm-hmm. It's almost like when you're in it, you don't see it. Like you need to be, unless you step out of it. So yeah.
Exactly. So, and it's almost the opposite now, to where the stigma is, instead of a negative stigma, is an over naive stigma now. Or I guess stigma wouldn't be the correct word for it. But, a lot of people now who are newer into the scene are looking at psychedelics like a miracle cure, like some sort of a panacea, where they don't have to do any work and you can just take this. And, we're seeing this push with big pharma to try and create, psychedelics that don't cause hallucination or whatever they're trying to describe the journey aspect of the medicine as now. But, I think those people are in for a bit of a rude awakening, to when we find out that this isn't a magic pill. There are no magic pills. It's always going to have to be some work. We can't get in there and get into our own self-patterning if we're not willing to pull up the mud boots and face our own demons.
Yeah, wow. Since you touched on it, I think it's good time to dive into that a little bit more. So what are your feelings about bringing it to the mainstream? What are you seeing? What are the dangers? What are we dealing here now? Because even like LinkedIn for me is a very conservative platform, and now I cannot like scroll unless I'm seeing a psychedelic mainstream news. So what are your thoughts on that?
I have many thoughts on that. First and foremost, I'd say I think it is wonderful that these medicines are finally being able to be spread out to the public and to the people that normally wouldn't engage in this type of work. I think this is the beginning of a wonderful movement of people really facing their own shadows, dangers and things that could go wrong. Oh, there's many. As I described, there's a lot of people going in with very naive notions and thinking these things will just cure you real quick and things like that. So I think business-wise, I think we're seeing a big bubble being created. I think we're seeing a lot of hope and a lot of money and a lot of really efforts of money grabbing going in, rather than people really trying to do something that helps. Everyone's in a scram to set up the biggest business they can, except what if in a year or two we find out that people just aren't that into ketamine? There's going to be a lot of wasted money into a lot of clinics that depend on repeat use. I think the sooner we can realize that a holistic approach is still necessary, that it can't just be, okay, take this and see me in 2 days, that it's, okay, take this. This is going to open you up in this way. And then we're going to be able to deal with this using other tools, I think is going to be very important. Other dangers, and I see this a lot less in the business aspect of LinkedIn and more so the world that I came from, kind of more the underground practitioners and the more spiritual side of things, is now that psychedelics are becoming so popular and plant medicines are becoming so popular, Now, one of the biggest dangers is also the ego of the practitioners and messiah complexes, which are popping up left and right. I've had to deal with a few myself, and it's scary. I mean, especially with 5-MeO DMT, this is the most powerful psychedelic in the world. And this experience cannot be explained, described, used language for. The experience is beyond mind. It's ineffable. And it really takes training in some sort of therapy or some sort of teaching modality to be able to also work with this medicine. And you're seeing a lot of people, just because it's an easy medicine to acquire, they're just getting it and then they, give it to some of their friends or give it to people they know. Everyone wants to put themselves in a teacher or leader position. And then, they don't have the tools to help these people through their process. And psychedelics, as much positive benefit is coming from them, they can cause as much, if not more damage than they can benefit if used improperly. And so I'm seeing a lot of medicine practitioners make their service about themselves. You look at their social media, you look at stuff like that, and it's all just pictures of themselves. These beautiful pictures with some dramatic quote and stuff. And it just becomes about them rather than the participant. So I think that's going to be really important. People who come from the spiritual side of things, who come from the underground service, need to kind of get with the program and realize this isn't about us. This is about our participants, and this is about helping people. And I think people on the business aspect need to get with the program and realize this isn't just about making money. This is about helping people. So as long as people from both sides can kind of come and meet in the middle about service and about that, this is about the participant, not about, return on investment for a company, and not about social media following for a practitioner. But this is about helping humanity deal with their own shit so we can stop taking our own suffering out on our neighbors and loved ones.
Yeah.
Part of my language.
Yeah. Powerful stuff you're sharing with us here. And I listened to Rick Doblin, and I think one of the questions that I asked to him was what he feels about the biotech companies moving in really fast into commodifying the medicines. And they said, what are your thoughts? And he said, fine, if it's going to take that level of, commodifying or whatever is happening right now to open up and bring this into therapeutic space, let it be. Because I didn't see any kind of consent from his side. And I know this because he comes from a very different angle. I know that he, throughout the years, he's been in the middle of everything. And I know that he witnessed and experienced a lot of suicides, deaths, and other treatable, symptoms and disorders where there are no help. And I think he's coming from that kind of place. His heart must be like, okay, yes, there are people out there who's trying to commodify, but if it's going to take that to bring it to the people who actually need it, let it be. So I was quite surprised. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Are you concerned at all?
Same thing. Honestly, same thing. If that's what it's going to take, I have a history of being overly opinionated about things, and I've always kind of been the type of person who, when I get into a modality, I get in full, I research every single thing about it, and I really make sure to bring the utmost integrity into the practice. And, that also slips into the shadow of egoism and opinionatedness. And, for a long time, even before I began serving medicine, my background is in teaching yoga and meditation and Vedantic philosophy. And, I remember when Bikram yoga started getting really popular, and it was like, I was super anti Bikram yoga, even though he was an awful person. Don't get me wrong. The documentary is crazy. But, it's what also got a ton of people, including myself, into yoga. And so if that's what it takes, if it takes some over-commodified kind of anemic, just drained, strictly for marketing type of practice to get people turned onto it, hey, cool. Bring them on, because just like me, at a certain point, I realized, okay, well, this type of yoga seems to really be lacking some substance. And then from there, I went and found other modalities and just continued. So I think, while I'm not thrilled to see certain things being over commodified and things like that, if this is what it takes to get the stuff out to the public, if that's what the public needs, who am I to go against the wind, as Paul Simon once said.
Yeah. And so what do you think about the education side? So what are the responsibilities as people in the frontier of this movement now? What are their responsibilities? What are your thoughts on that?
Responsibilities, educating the public on what they're really working with, educating the public on what the stuff really does, besides just the nice, light and fluffy stuff. Of course, we're seeing, you've seen a lot of the media and a lot of the advertisements for psilocybin therapies and retreats and stuff like that. It's all fairly fluffy. It's all love and light. This can be some of the scariest work a human can engage in, bar none. This can be the most confrontational work a person can ever step up to. So addressing that, addressing what can go wrong. And also, I feel that they're taking this angle again that was, outdated from the 80s and 90s of the bad trip, and trying to bring this in like, oh, well, we don't want people to have a bad trip. Except what we used to call bad trips, we simply refer to challenging experiences. And now we know that's where most of the learning happens. When the medicine, the experience is trying to show us something that we have an aversion to, and every bit of our consciousness is trying to shut it out by translating it into a terrifying experience. If we don't have the tool belt, if we don't have the foundational practice or understanding to know to surrender to that and to say, okay, what have you got to show me? If we are just trying to look for the positive and just trying to look for the feel good stuff, we're going to miss out on the real work, because it takes facing our demons. It takes really getting in there and facing the scary stuff to have that catharsis, that results in that levity, that blissful lightness on the other side. So I think educating on what people are really getting themselves into is very important. I think there needs to be an importance of making sure it's accessible. A lot of the psychedelic therapies and treatments we're seeing are very high end and are not accessible to most of the people that actually need them. So I think it's very important and I'm not saying don't have high end offerings. I'm not saying don't, have prices that reflect your type of offering, but also leave room for making it affordable as well. We always do at least 1 to 2 scholarship spaces on our retreats, and things like that. And just, different price tiers, just making sure that you're not eliminating everybody except for very well-to-do clientele. So I think that's going to be really important in the future. And I think making sure people who are on the front lines of this medicine, people who are serving it, people who are working with it, are doing their own work, are doing their own internal work. It can be very easy for a teacher just to kind of set their own process to the side and just go full into service. And, it seems we can even feel like it to ourselves, like, oh yes, this is the right thing to be doing. I should put myself aside to be in service. However, if people are not doing their own work, if they're not getting to understand their own inner patternings, if they're not getting to understand the underlying traumas and experiences behind their own behavioral patterns, then they are really doing the world a disservice. We cannot put ourselves in a proper teacher position or position of authority if we are not doing our own work. And so people making sure that they've done the work and can be a hollow vessel for participants and can really assist participants through their process, not through what we're projecting from ourselves onto their process. So I think that'll be really important in the future. I think those will be the top ones.
Yeah, I love it. Loving your energy, by the way. It's very upbeat, and you're just
thank you.
You seem, this kind of shows that you've been doing a lot of work, 100%. And good job that you opened a little window. So I read a little article very recently. One of the concerns was that one guy is going to take a bad trip, and that guy is going to be in a position where he can exploit it, and then it's all going to come crashing down. So I know what you mean with so my understanding, coming from a holistic background, sometimes like we don't have the capacity and we don't have the tools to interpret the experience, integrate the experience. Sometimes we don't have these things, and it's easy. And if all of us are walking, talking, deceived and blind spots because we can't see ourselves for what we are. And as a teacher, as a guide, as a facilitator, like you said, if we don't do the work, then imagine holding space for those who don't have the capacity. They're going to interpret it. It's going to come from a perspective of limitation. It's going to come from a trauma response interpretation. Like I've experienced a lot of ceremonies where people would just kind of label these things as entities, this and that. But it's almost like, and I feel like the teacher's responsibility or the facilitator's responsibility is always bringing them back to themselves. Look, there's nothing outside that the medicine put in, but it's whatever is amplified, it is your own work, it's just amplified so you can see. Because on a daily waking, you know, state, we're not able to see our blind spots, we're not able to see what is deceived and what is suppressed and what we carry. And like you said, I think there's going to be a lot of conversations that needs to happen around this, not all love and light, and also, you know, it's not about seeking the positive benefits, right? Or at least, you know, especially post-pandemic world, I feel like those retreats are going to be filled with people who desperately seeking connection, and they're so fed up of the lockdowns and they're so fed up of the restrictions. I can just imagine in the next couple of years we're going to see a lot of amplified demand for retreats, right? So I think this is a great time to dive into why 5-MeO.
Oh yes. So firstly, what is 5-MeO? 5-MeO DMT is nicknamed, has a few great nicknames, the crown jewel of the entheogenic kingdom. It has the nickname, the God molecule. What separates 5-MeO DMT from all other psychedelics is in its peak experience. It quite often allows the participant to slip into what is known as a non-dual state. So there is a complete cessation of self-activity, a complete cessation of the mind. This is the true definition of the ego death. And that's a term that gets thrown out a lot without people really understanding what it is. People are like, oh yeah, you know, I had this ego death. What is that? What is the ego? The ego is the part of our mind, the part of our personality, or the part of our being that gives us the experience of being a separate individual. And when we work with ego dissolving medicines, where they target in the brain is the default mode network. So the areas of the brain that are responsible for giving us the experience of an individual. And in its peak experience, 5-MeO shuts it all down. It quiets those areas. And what is that like? Well, that's the mystical experience. That is the great, ineffable, inscrutable, indescribable initiation that has been sought after for millennia upon millennia. Every ancient culture had some way of going into this initiation. Ancient Egypt, India, of course, in Greece and Rome, they had the mystery school of Ulysses. And that was an ongoing tradition for over 2,000 years. And it was said to be, you know, that was said to be the school that held humanity together. The gift of being able to die before you die. And so 5-MeO DMT is the only psychedelic that reliably results in that experience. Of course, we can bring ourselves to a state of ego dissolution through very high doses of various psychedelics, but none will be like this. This is the big bang. And, you know, it's a whole process. The actual experience itself is only 15 to 45 minutes. And it can be described as there being a light that is everything and infinite in nature. And that light is so powerful and so overwhelming that it just absorbs everything that you are, and you lose yourself within this light, or more so, remember yourself within this light as true infinite consciousness. And so why this experience is so ineffable, why it's so inscrutable, is because it can only be experienced when the mind is shut down, when there is no longer an individual self-observation point. So there's no, you know, there's no self to be saying, wow, this is crazy, or wow, look at that. None of that. It is pure, undifferentiated, oceanic, boundless consciousness. And that is the big experience. You know, we've heard reports of people having the mystical experience, even atheists saying they felt that they were bathed in God's love. This is that. It is a full religious experience. And every religion, every faith, they've all got a word for this. The Christians and Catholics call it the beatific vision. In Islam, they call it fitra. The yogis call it samadhi. The Buddhists call it nirvana. Everyone's got a word for it. But essentially, it is that essential surrendering of the self to the infinite. And it is a temporary letting go of all you know to be, or all you think to be true, and all you think you know about yourself, to be put into the blender of oblivion momentarily, and to remember yourself as timeless, boundless, undifferentiated awareness. And so why does that medicine matter? Why does it matter that people have this huge experience? Because we as humans are suffering more than we've ever suffered before. And for us to be suffering, it doesn't have to be some extreme acute PTSD. It doesn't need to be physical ailment. It doesn't need to be dire straits. Suffering can come from so many areas. The yogis say there's 5 root causes of all suffering. Avidya, which is ignorance of our own true nature, is infinity. Then there is asmita, which is egoism, when we begin to over-identify with our individual personification and take ourselves a little too seriously. Then raga, which is attachments to our personality, to our surroundings, to our belongings, to our lifestyle. And then dvesa, which is aversion to leaving our comfort bubble. And we know that growth very seldom happens within the bubble of comfort. And when we've done all that, we've limited ourselves to this individual experience, we've over-attached to ourselves, we've decided that our whole reality is just what we have and what's around us and what is tangible, then naturally we're not going to want to stray outside of that, because that is unknown outside of there. And that's naturally going to lead into the 5th, which is abhinivesa, which is fear, ultimately fear of death. And if we don't remember that we are infinite consciousness, we are certainly going to not want this all to end. So, we use an in-depth preparation process and really have participants go in there. We've got different journaling prompts. We've got different ways to begin self-inquiry. And there it's all about lenses. So, as I said, my background is in yoga, but I do not expect, someone to come into my philosophical paradigm just to work with me. So we use the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell's hero's journey is our main framework, as that is a transcultural geographical map that's innate within the human experience for everybody. And then we've interwoven yogic philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, Hermeticism, alchemy, the whole 9 yards, all the good stuff. And given participants this nice, exactly that, transcultural geography, so they can find their footing in what can be an unnerving process. Because preparing to do this medicine is terrifying. We always say the medicine begins right when you say yes. So the moment you say yes to this work, your subconscious is going to start to feel into what's confrontational in there. Your mind is going to see that you are heading towards oblivion, essentially, that you are heading towards the unknown. So those insecurities, those uncertainties are going to start to come up. And that's part of the medicine. That's a big part of the process. So we work in depth with our participants via Zoom calls for weeks before their experience and help them unpack their process and begin their process. See which languages and lenses they're most comfortable with, whether it's science, whether it's religion, whether it's yogic spirituality, whether it's, any of them. We try and stay versed in as many languages because they're all just simply lenses through which we can attempt to view the ineffable. So once they come for their retreat, our retreats are generally 5 days, and there's multiple medicine experiences in there. And it's really at that point about using the medicine as a catalyst for cathartic release. And so when we get the participant in there, you get them on the medicine, and it's not like you just go immediately to non-duality. You don't just go immediately to the Godhead. There has to be a falling away process first. There has to be a surrender. And so that's what is known as the gateless gates. There is a threshold that one reaches, and it is the farthest one can go while keeping individual identity. And there is where you have to surrender yourself, surrender your entire belief system, essentially. And that's where the real confrontational part can come in, because the mind will often translate that as, if I go any farther, I'm going to die. If I go any farther, I'm never coming back, because the mind does not understand infinity at all. It's something we can't truly grasp or wrap our heads around. So facing those proverbial demons at the gate, the bits of the mind, the aspects that come out with their last cry for help, for survival. Once we let that go, then comes the cathartic release. Then comes just a big dump of patterning. And we watch participants go through this in actual physical release, whether it be through intense vibration. If you watch videos of people on 5-MeO, you may see very, 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 very fast trembling and shaking. I mean, doesn't look real. It's wild. Shaking and trembling is a natural way for the body to release trauma. If you watch a lion, video of a lion almost getting a gazelle, and that gazelle just barely gets away, if you look close, it does this, this little shake it out. And that shakes the traumatic event out of the fascia, the connective tissue. And that's where we store so much of our stuff. But we're not trained these days to release our own baggage. So our connective tissue is just wound up so tight. And so that catharsis really is a huge catharsis. So we watch people either go through tremors, screaming, a big, nice cry, even physical purging, just some sort of letting go. Sometimes there's no outward appearance of catharsis, but they're in it. And then after that, then is the entire process of, okay, how do we take an experience that is so far beyond the mind and make it applicable for our daily lives? How do we make that experience benefit our experience here somehow? So then it's about using integrative practices, whether from Western psychotherapy, brain hacking type of Joe Dispenza type of practices, to Eastern mysticism, to alchemy, to whatever lens or language this participant needs to continue the path of self-inquiry. Because after we've had that initial experience, imagine it like a hand grenade being thrown into the proverbial lake of your subconscious. And so then it's about dealing with all the things that come up, because that's going to knock all the patterning to surface. So then we get in there with the integrative practices and also low doses of the medicine too. And we use it like a scalpel and get surgical with the process. And then from there, there's aftercare. So aftercare is really important, not just with all psychedelics, but especially with 5-MeO DMT. Being there for them, for the following couple weeks, because as my favorite teacher, Adyashanti, says, enlightenment is a destructive process. And the peak experience of 5-MeO DMT is absolutely a peak enlightenment experience. Except when we have glimpsed that truth, then there's going to be a falling away of different belief systems and patternings that can no longer hold to that truth. And that can be the scary part for participants, where they feel like they're going crazy, where it feels like their world is falling apart, because there has to be a falling away. Once your awareness experiences that type of boundless consciousness and understands itself a bit more, some of the old forms of torture we tended to put ourselves through are no longer going to seem as appealing. Some of the old, prisons that we kept ourselves shackled in are all of a sudden going to appear with the gates wide open. Except the mind tends to reach and grasp for that which is falling away simply because it is familiar. So even our innermost patternings that, tend us to have us in the deepest of suffering are certain, mind patterns that are just awful, that, different triggers and stuff like that. Even though, of course, we want to get rid of it, the mind is still going to grasp for it when it's falling away because it's familiar. Our minds love suffering way more than we'd care to admit. So being there for participants in that process and offering aftercare integration support, different reading material as well. And then we do individualized kind of integration plans with sets of practices that are kind of suitable for their process as well. But why 5-MeO? Because it is the most powerful, fast-acting substance on the planet that has the potential to allow us to understand our own patterns of suffering and release them subsequently.
Wow, that was so much to process. Thank you so much. This is beautiful. Are we talking about the Bufo alvarius 5-MeO, or is it I know that one comes from the toad, the other one is not. So which one are we talking about?
So there's various, it comes in 5-MeO is found in the Bufo alvarius toad. It's found in Varrola, Wambisa, and a few other Amazonian plants. It's found in Yopo, which is a snuff, as well as Vilca, and a few other areas in nature. It's also produced within the human body, mainly in the lungs and the soft tissue of the eyes and the kidneys, I believe. And it is synthetically made also. And that's mainly where we use. We generally promote and tend to use synthetically made 5-MeO DMT, especially over Bufo alvarius. When Bufo started getting popular, we were serving that mainly. And it wasn't too long before we saw what was happening. I mean, the toad population was being decimated. The cartels started getting involved in Sonora. You started seeing packages of medicine coming with these bits of black carbon looking stuff that's actually toxic to smoke, but they were putting it in there to weigh it down, just to rip people off essentially. And all that aside, there's 11 additional alkaloids with the Bufo alvarius secretion, 8 of which are known to be cardiotoxic. Even though they're in such small amounts, they still have been known to affect. And, as we deal with a lot of elderly clientele as well, we like to stay very safe. Things that don't mess with the heart if they don't need to. The experience between synthetically made 5-MeO and Bufo 5-MeO is exactly the same. Exactly the same. if there wasn't for a taste and the amount of difference in smoke and stuff like that, people wouldn't know the difference. And so, you know, there was a big push where people got stuck in the paradigm of natural versus synthetic. And it's an understandable paradigm. However, we've got to understand that that's just the mind attempting to create stories. Of course, natural is going to be better than synthetic in certain instances, food and things like that. However, not everything is black and white. Not everything can be these cut and dry rules like that. And so I've found a lot of people who were still in the stage of being stuck in over-identifying with their spiritual lineage, or over-identifying with what they think a spiritual person is supposed to look like, etc. We find a lot of that kind of kickback against synthetic. You know, oh, well, you know, this toad stuff was made by God and made in nature, or, you know, this stuff was made in a lab. Okay, so the lab and the person in it were made by God and nature as well. Where, you know, it's really just semantics at that point. But yeah, we work with synthetic, and also a main reason is dosage specificity. We really like to know exactly how much we're giving someone. Toad secretion can have anywhere from 10% 5-MeO to almost 30% 5-MeO. And that's a huge margin of error. The difference in those doses are, you know, you could go for giving, you could be attempting to give someone what we call a hug dose, or a middle range kind of low dose. And, you know, that could have a higher 5-MeO concentration. You could send them straight into the Godhead without wanting to. So I think dosage specificity is really important for us. So yeah, those are why we use synthetic.
Amazing. So the works is in the dose, and has, you know, Hamilton Morris, he's always talking about I think he made a lot of impact, didn't he, with bringing out the pamphlet and really kind of bringing awareness that we shouldn't really touch the toads, but look, you can have the same medicine somehow alternatively, and you don't have to touch the toads and stuff like that. And the fact that there is no lineage and there is no known, or we haven't found anything that says that the toads were being used for too long. I mean, it's only been God knows how many years, but it's not that long.
30 some odd years,
so it makes sense. It makes sense what you said about the synthetic, and the dosing is so important, especially if you're working with elderly, if you're working with, I always say, people with not a lot of capacity. I think you've got to be really careful with the dose, right? This is where the key is. So thank you for clarifying that. And also, of
course,
I was going to ask you about the psychosomatic experience, but you already told me the trembling, shaking, all of that. I love that, because I feel like some of us in the West, or the modern world, we kind of so shy to scream, to cry, to let our bodies tremble. And you know, you said earlier about the surrendering, coming from the holistic background. I always hold those two together. For me, surrendering is just allowing your body to do that intelligent stuff that it needs to do and it's wired to do. It can be as simple as that. It doesn't need to be scary. It doesn't need to be, because I always believe that as much as we are trauma burdened, because all of us somehow, we don't get away with trauma. We all hold it. But at the same time, we also hold this beautiful harmony, the homeostasis that body is craving to create life and create harmony and create beauty. I think it kind of, we hold it together. And for me, surrendering can be just letting your body just do what it needs to do. If it's trembling, shaking, crying, right? Because it could be just one step towards your building your capacity. And these would be my understanding. Okay, so where are you based?
Right now we are based in Tepoztlan, Mexico. So about an hour and a half south of Mexico City. They call it the Land of Eternal Spring. Amazingly beautiful area, spring weather year round. Our flagship center is opening here. We're looking to open hopefully in September. And then we have a center opening in second quarter of next year in Costa Rica as well. And we're teamed up with Hive Bio for that one.
Amazing.
And then we'll have operations going in Jamaica as well. We're teamed up with Silo Wellness to start doing 5-MeO retreats in Jamaica this summer. I believe in August we start.
So much is going on. So and you recently had a webinar, which I really feel bad because I missed it. I really wanted to come. Maybe you can just kind of give us a 5 minutes of the webinar that you presented not long ago, I believe, right? It was last week. I can't remember exactly.
Which one? I've done a couple in the past couple of weeks. I think you might be talking. There was one we did with Entheogens. I think that was the most recent one. And that was my partner Victoria and I. and just explaining kind of, I believe the subject was samadhi and 5-MeO DMT. So we
That's the
were
one.
covering,
That's the one.
talking about the mystical experience. The mystical experience, the word mystical experience is something being thrown around a lot in psychedelia, except it's very highly almost ignored by the in the clinical lens. There's so much study done around it and so many people speaking about it, but what is the mystical experience? What do you do with it? We see, okay, 84% of people to do this medicine like this had a mystical experience. These people said the mystical experience was the most meaningful thing in their life. But okay, what is the mystical experience? How do you navigate to and from it? So, as I said, our main framework is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And that is the innate archetypal story of the hero leaving their place of comfort, leaving their familiar land, and stepping into unknown territories to engage in the work. And it is there they face their demons. They get the boon, they get the elixir, and they come back to the community. And that's really all just such an important process that gets so little attention. And it's just always about chasing the positive, love and light and whatnot. But the hero's journey is scary. Many parts of it are terrifying. And so kind of going over that whole lens and showing how there's so many different lenses wrapped up into the same thing, and how it's far less about the specific language of the lens and more about the experience itself, or else it becomes about the finger pointing at the sun rather than the sun itself. And it's tough, though. It's a bit of an issue because the experience itself cannot really be spoken about. It's something that we don't have language for. It's something we don't have the mental faculties for. So then it really becomes about preparing for and returning from, what to do on the way there and what can be done returning from to draw this experience into your daily life. And then furthermore, how do you share it with the community? How does this get spread around? Because that often gets mistaken as, oh, well, this worked for me, so obviously this is the exact way it has to work for everyone else. And that's what happened with religion. It's the ego tends to attach to that which in which it finds liberation. So then it becomes a lot less about telling people, okay, so to do this, you have to go there, do this retreat, take this psychedelic and do this type of work, but more so, hey, I found my path, into the unknown and back, and knowing everyone's path is going to be completely unique and individual, but allowing the shifted you, allowing that new presence within you to inspire others around you and to almost give them permission in a way to leave the regularity of their daily life, to leave the normalcy of what they're used to and step into the unknown in order to find those demons and get that boon.
Yes, I love that. I think more so embodied energy, because when we do the deepest work, I think it kind of reflects on the way we carry ourselves, can be visible. Your eyebrows soften, your jaw soften, like you can see when somebody's going through that process. I love that. So I have a couple questions. So what would you advise people if they're interested in such a big experience like 5-MeO, and what should they be considering? What should they be looking for? Especially like going
things to consider.
Like finding the right retreat is like a big deal also, right?
Yeah.
So if you could maybe just
absolutely. So if someone is looking to work with 5-MeO DMT, whether retreat or a one-off ceremony, first most important thing is to research who you're sitting with. Research the practitioner, get to know the practitioner. I cannot stress this enough. It really, really matters who you sit with us on this medicine. And for God's sakes, don't try and do it yourself. I also work as an integration specialist, and quite often I have people reach out who are, either tried the medicine themselves or just some kind of, we call them road shamans, the guys that just tour around, going blasting people off and then just leaving and just collecting money. It can be really, really, really important that for safety reasons, they don't do it alone. And two, that they have someone who knows the medicine and knows the process to assist them. We've heard of people being like, oh yeah, I just had my sister, holding space, but she's never done medicines or anything like that. And so you need to have someone who, first of all, knows how to keep you alive if things go wrong, because things go wrong with this medicine. You know, person can be on their back and they may start to purge. They need to be rolled into recovery position, things like that. All those safety aspects are very important. So it just goes right into set and setting. So researching your facilitator, making sure that they abide by best practices. And the best practices are for 5-MeO were put out by a secret group called the Conclave, and they're on the Conclave website. Making sure participants abide by best practices, making sure participants have, practitioners, making sure they have experience, making sure they were actually trained by someone, making sure that they've been doing this for a little while and not just, you know, wanted to look cool on social media. So they ordered some toad from some guy in Sonora and, you know, strapped a crystal to their head and started giving it to people. It's very, very important. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of resources to be able to really research your practitioners right now. I did an episode of the Plant Medicine podcast with Dr. Lynn Morsky that was exactly that, on how to find a retreat leader or facilitator. And I think one of the main things we spoke about was making sure that they've done their work, making sure that they've done their work before they started trying to serve it to other people. Because that's the biggest issue, is practitioners just getting their, you know, having one big experience or like a few big experiences with this medicine, be like, oh, wow, that's so amazing. You know, and naturally you're going to want everyone you love to experience it. Naturally, you're going to want people to experience it, except the ego is the part that's going to get in the way and say, I'm the one who should do this, and give it to people without any type of understanding or training. So making sure that they're in it to be of service and rather than to inflate their own ego is going to be really, really important, because that's, I'd say 90% of practitioners out there. That's what you're dealing with. So that, and making sure they know how to keep you safe, and making sure there's aftercare. Talk to them about their aftercare process. Talk to them about their integration process. If they stumble on that or don't come up with much to say, or say, you know, that they have resources, they need to have a specific plan on how to hold space for you after your experience, and a specific plan on how to prepare you. Those would be the main ones.
Amazing. Beautiful. All right. As we come to end of our conversation, I just want to also touch on something that's really important to me as my personal inquiry. So if this experience is so big, and if this experience is so ineffable, and we lose ourselves in this physical body, like, why the search, do you think? I know it's been done for millennia. Like, why is this search? What is it that we want? What is it like? Because it reminds me of the mystical cycle also. Like, is it like, there is this really popular story, Joel, that maybe you've heard. There was this nun that she spent like 40 years in the monastery, and because she's a nun and she kind of left the monastery and retired or whatever, they said, wow, 40 years is a long time. You must have talked to the angels. You must have talked to the God. Can you tell us, what did you learn? And she kind of paused and she said, I learned how to eat and sleep. So what are your thoughts? Like, what is this search, this innate desire to know?
I think, the yogis divided up the ages into what they called yugas, and there are 4 yugas. And instead of it being a linear timeline, it is cyclical and goes in a spiral. And we have been in what is known as Kali Yuga, which is the 4th age, and is the age of chaos, the age of confusion, uncertainty. And we are transitioning from Kali Yuga into Satya Yuga, the age of truthfulness, the golden age. And so for this to happen, if we are all the same quantum field of consciousness, experiencing ourselves subjectively through individual experiences, then consciousness itself seems to be going through a bit of a purging process right now in so many different ways. I mean, we're seeing it just with the pandemic, of all the old structures, so many of the old structures, the old stories, systems just crumbling before our eyes. Old ways of thinking showing themselves to be known as ineffective. Huge paradigms shifting. This deep desire to begin to understand the roots of consciousness, this push towards AI and to understand the singularity. This is where we're at in the evolution of our consciousness, is understanding where we came from, or attempting to remember where we came from. And so I think that it is right in line that 5-MeO came came into the scope at this time. It's funny. I, for the first time, tried 20 years ago. It was completely legal in the States until 2011. And I don't even remember my experience. I don't remember it being a meaningful experience. I knew plenty of people who did it back then, and it just did not catch on because I don't think we were ready for it yet. I don't believe consciousness had evolved to the point yet to where it was ready for this type of work. But now we seem to be in an accelerated, rapid state of healing and state of release, and it's as if all of humanity is, in what would be called spiritual emergency, and we're in the grips of a full awakening. Except awakenings do seem detrimental. They seem chaotic and they seem scary, and so all of humanity is kind of in it at the same time. So I think it's right in suit that psychedelics have come into play, and that especially 5-MeO DMT, the great initiation finally being brought back into society. I have great hopes for it. When we can deal with our own suffering and deal with our own limited views of ourselves in the world, then the amount of suffering that is caused by other people will decrease exponentially.
Wow, that's so good. Thanks for sharing that. And do you think pandemic is also one of the reasons that we are experiencing now, because this cosmic purging is happening? Would you say that?
I believe so. Whatever the story with the pandemic is, plenty of people feel it was man-made. Plenty of people, who doesn't really matter. We have to remember that we're part of nature, that all of us, not just some people, are all a part of the same force of nature. And humanity needed a timeout. Humanity needed to get spanked on the butt and told to sit down and be quiet for a little while and deal with our shit. And when we're put into isolation like that, when we're put into quarantine like that, we're left with ourselves, not as many distractions, not as many things to pass the time. So those demons are right there. And so we've seen so much change come from this. I think it's, the worst and best thing to happen. I definitely feel that it is fully in line with our evolution and with what is happening, and was a necessary evil in many ways to, we couldn't call it an evil really, but it was a necessary situation because we were quickly headed into a place that we probably couldn't reverse, from there. And so just seeing, the benefit that happened to the earth and the climate and stuff like that, and those few months where, everyone was kind of really quarantined for a little while, just seeing what can happen, what can be done for healing, I think was something that humanity needed. And for the first time in our, known history, everyone in the world was in something together. And as dividing as everything feels, it still brought humanity together to some degree. And I think I think a lot will come from it, but I definitely feel it was part of the whole process.
Yeah, it is. Paradoxically, we are separated, but then we got together. One of my friends calls it the collective rites of passage initiation.
Yeah.
The great initiation.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Joel, thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Thank you.
Oh my God.
Yes, indeed. Likewise.
So glad, so happy to be connected with you. So we will add all your links and your amazing offers in the comments for our listeners. I'm sure they enjoy this. It's so packed with so much information. I think I need to re-listen to you again to really process. I'm sure a lot of our listeners feel the same. Thank you so much for dropping all that wisdom, and thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you. Keep
offering and keep doing what you're doing. And I think this is so amazing that you guys are so involved in this and being in the front line of what's going on now. So appreciate you.
Thank you. Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. I'm sure we'll follow your journey and hopefully have you back again, part 2 at some point. Yes. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. This is Joel, and he's doing incredible work. We'll share with you some of his offerings, and thank you for tuning in. I'll see you guys on the next one. Much love. Bye for now. Thank you so much for joining us. Psychedelic Conversations podcast is designed to educate, inform, and expand awareness. For more information, please head over to psychedelicconversations.com. You can also share with your friends or leave a review so that we can reach more people. You can also join us in our private Facebook group to keep the conversation going. This show is for information purposes only, and it is not intended to provide mental health or medical advice. Thanks for listening.